Dishonored is a series that I don't feel has gotten the love it truly deserves. Its fans love it and swear by its greatness, not only as an immersive sim, but as a stealth game and as a franchise. And there's a lot to love about this series. Its gameplay, art direction, world building, and level design are some of the best in the industry, as was the series that brought Arkane Studios quite literally out of obscurity and ruin to make it a respected name in the industry we know it as today. And despite it never being the highest selling series in video game history, Dishonored has a hardcore fan base that not only loves this series to death, but clambers for more of it, myself included. And while Arkane has seemingly moved on to games like Deathloop and unfortunately Redfall, I wanted to take the time to look back at the series that I not only love, but I'm dying to get more of. A series that introduced not only me, but many other console players like myself at the time to the power of the immersive sim and the fun that they can hold within. This video is the culmination of all 3 Dishonored videos we've done here on the channel thus far, with each chapter listed below focusing on each game of trilogy. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and if you want to further support my efforts here, consider becoming a member for the low price of 99 cents. It means a ton and it all goes right back into this content. Thank you so much for your time, and with that, let's get into Dishonored, a franchise left forgotten.
You're the only one. You'll know what to do, won't you?
Before actually discussing the game of Dishonored, we need to discuss the genre this game stems from, that being the immersive sim. If you ask players to define an immersive sim, I have a feeling you get a ton of answers, so let me do my best to define it here. To many players, the immersive sim defines freedom. The freedom to choose how to approach each area, each puzzle, each objective, all with the goal of solving a larger problem, using the tools given to the player. Now, this sounds like a ton of games. A game like Splinter Cell gives you a series of problems and creates a world that you'd be able to solve them. And while this illusion of choice is nice to have, it is here that we begin to see the delineation. See, the Splinter Cell example would be a series of events predetermined by the developers, forcing the player to conform to the world. Warren Spector, known as the daddy of immersive sims, said it best in this quote: "You are there. Nothing stands between you and the belief that you're in an alternate world." Distilled down, what makes an immersive sim is the sandbox, a set of rules that the world will play by, and that world is reactive to the player's use of the sandbox and the tools handed to them. This allows the player to proceed, interact, and attempt to manipulate the world in any way they see fit, breaking the world as needed and having it react back to you, as opposed to funneling you, the player, into the next scripted sequence of events. Essentially, the world is your oyster. You are given a problem, a world with its own rules, ideas, characters, NPCs, and laws, a set of tools, and told to solve said problem. With lore trappings may differ, the immersive sim is this, distilled down to its truest form. You may go through the front door, guns blazing, a valid option, or you could sneak around the guards, cut through a side window, stab that waitress in the face, all to drop poison in the cup. That's also a valid option. You may choose not to poison anyone and let one NPC kill the target, not even getting your hands dirty. That is also a valid option. And the game itself allows each one of these to happen, following its predetermined rules set the exact moment the player enters the arena. Each one of these is a story to the player, a way of making their run uniquely their own, with their own trials, struggles, and triumph in between. Your run of Dishonored has a high chance of being completely different than mine, and yet the game still says, yes, your way is just as viable as anyone else's. The operative word here is choice and freedom. Do we kill? Do we avoid? Do we take the path less traveled, or break away with our powers over the main gate? The choice is yours, and this is why I am such a sucker for immersive sims as a whole, easily being one of my favorite genres of games as long as it's done right. Over the years, we've seen many attempts done on the genre, from games like Ultima, System Shock, Deus Ex, and more. However, a lot of these titles were only on PC. So in reality, Dishonored was the first real introduction point for a lot of people to the immersive sim, myself included. And when it comes to the immersive sim aspects of Dishonored, there are some glaring flaws in the inherent design and systems at play here, but we'll get into that soon enough. What Dishonored does is wrap these ideas in an amazing world, littered with fascination and otherworldliness, while also being grounded in an industrialized cesspit known as Dunwall. It's wrapped in a series of well thought out levels, leading to neutralizing the worst this world has to offer, all to help save and influence the world around us, from our child to the citizens we walk among. But with that long preamble out of the way, let's get into it.
Watch it.
We open Dishonored and stepping in the shoes of Corvo Attano, Lord Protector to the Empress Lady Jessamine. As all great bodyguards do, we have great love for the lady of herself. so much so that we have a kid together, Emily, who greets us as we get off the boat. After entertaining her with a game of hide and seek to tutorialize the stealth systems to us, we lay witness to the assassination of the lady herself, with Corvo taking the blame, being stripped of his daughter, post and title, and thrown into jail, hence the name of the entire game. In this short preamble sequence, Arkane takes the time to ensure the player has every opportunity to learn about the world we are in, that being the city of Dunwall. We meet Anton Sokolov, famous inventor, painter, and overall important man to this city. We learn of the rat plague infecting its populace, a disease that we will learn about more as a main game mechanic. We learn that Corvo has been away for a long period of time, doing work for the Empress herself, in an effort to gain aid for the aforementioned plague. Dishonored throws a lot of world building at you in the first few minutes of the game, and it's up to the player to take as much time as they want, listening to offhanded conversations, looking at the world around you, allowing the player to learn a lot about the current predicament the world is in, and that carries throughout the entire runtime of Dishonored. There are books to be read, adverts to look at, conversations to eavesdrop on, conversations directed at you, environmental designs meant to tell a story. The amount of lore, information, and story that can be gleaned across the world of Dishonored is vast, and does what many games attempt to do, that being making the world itself a character. We discussed this in certain Resident Evil videos, but with a game like Dishonored, it's imperative that these stories are told, making this world feel realized, giving the illusion you're having an impact. And you know this by the wanted posters hanging all over the city, the way the guards discuss your past actions, the Lord Regent's announcements over the intercom. All of this gives the feeling that the world is changing due to both your direct actions, as well as the events that are going on outside of your control. This makes Dunwall and its inhabitants feel realized, as any great piece of fiction attempts to do, and this world Arkane created is dripping with it. The world is attempting to hook the player into caring about it, and Dishonored grabbed me in spades with this. From the cleaned up majestic areas of Castle Dunwall, to the slums of the flooded district, to the Hound's Pit's pub, the hub area we'll be returning to time after time. All these areas play to support the idea and themes Dishonored is trying to convey. How classism is an ongoing struggle, how areas condemned by the castle are left to rot, the way that the industry of whale harvesting has taken the toll on the world, covering Dunwall in smog and filth. While running off of the oil pressed from harvested whales, the world is striking, making it all the more enticing to explore its nooks and crannies. And this is where the influences of the immersive sim can be seen, where the influences of the world and how it is given and portrayed to the player can influence the route one takes to reach their end goal. While these levels are small, this isn't a massive open world, the large amount of exploration and methods found while exploring lead to giving you that aha moment, where not only do you find a new path or tool for your infiltration, but learn more about the world while doing so. This is further enhanced by the constant hunt for bone charms and runes, resources used to give added enhancements to the player, giving more tools, upgrades, and powers that will use to solve the overlying problem of the level. Runes are symbols carved in bones that are the harvested whales, giving the impression that these artifacts that enhance you are also filled with a dark magic imbued within them from another plane, that being the plane of the outsider, a mystical man that gives Corvo his otherworldly powers, for the reason in wanting to see just what he'll do with these powers to influence his mission in the world around him. Areas with these items are hidden throughout the world, in safes, behind paintings, and makeshift shrines surrounded by more dark magic, reverberating with the energy of the outsider. Every aspect of this world is dripping in story, lore, and most of all, style. Having come from the PlayStation 3 and 360 generation of consoles, this game is visually striking today as it was 11 years ago. Its washed out colors reminiscent of a watercolor painting, giving a striking style to Dishonored that is still unmatched to this day. Colors pop where they need to, hues of purples and burnt reds standing out amongst the drab and washed out grays and browns of the walls of Dunwall. Advertisements for food, tinctures, and royal decrees litter the walls to give them life, while also potentially foreshadowing events to come, like the party at Lady Boyle's house. Dunwall and the world that it exists in is striking, and is much of the reason why this game is so fondly remembered to this day. The style of the world, the grizzled, hulking guards, the focus on facial animations, all give Dishonored a style that is both striking and everlasting, making this game a visual treat to come back to time after time again. And the interaction with this world is just as innovative, albeit with some minor flaws. At its core, Dishonored sets out to be that immersive sim we discussed before, all of it linking back to the core gameplay loops. We are given a puzzle, told to solve, and make our way to the exit. On the surface, this game does fulfill that promise. You can go in the front door, murdering all that lie in your way. You can sneak around, finding the route less traveled. You can eliminate your targets in a number of ways, as most of the puzzles involve an assassination or a removal of a target from power. Within these systems, there's an overarching system known as chaos, where all of your actions will feed into. The more you kill, the higher your chaos, which in turn has tangible effects on the world around you. The flesh-eating rats appearing a lot more, and in more aggressive quantities. More guards will be stationed around the play space, and the ways you interact with the world alter to fit these parameters. However, it is in this chaos system that the immersive sim quality begins to kind of fall apart. Remember, the main quality of an immersive sim is that the world gives you a set of rules and tangible obstacles, a set of tools for you to interact with the world with, and a main goal. However, when a player is told that the chaos of the world is affected by your actions, this inherently affects the way the player engages with the world and its systems, inferring naturally that low chaos equals good ending and high chaos equals bad ending, which, spoilers, this is essentially realized. This means that knowingly or not, Arkane has created a system where most players will tend to attempt to do a low chaos version of the game first, leaving murder to a minimum and being spotted to the lowest possibility. Thus, the main quantifier of an immersive sim is inherently burst, as the player is then coerced into a certain style of play. This is further enhanced by the fact that the low chaos version of these levels have a ton more content within them, story beats, world events, and entire areas not being seen if one wishes to go in guns blazing. Once you begin to see that the low chaos runs have more tangible goods associated with them, from endings, level outcomes, and more content, this further pushes the player into turning it into more of a stealth game, rather than an immersive sim. While the qualities of the genre still exist on a micro level, the illusion of choice is affected to its core, as the benefits of low chaos greatly outweigh the benefits of high. But that's not to say that there aren't benefits to the high chaos or the murder route, but this all comes down to a systems level. This is your weapon wheel. There are a number of options the player has in dispatching the enemy, from your gun to your crossbow, spring razor, mines, which are cool as hell, and your main weapon, your folding sword. All of these are essentially rendered useless when you're attempting to kill as few people as possible, relegating your wheel to sleep darts and the powers of blink, possession, bend time, and dark sight. If there was more of a balance of gear that could be used for low chaos like stun mines, hallucination darts, and other non-lethal means of taking someone out, this balance would greatly serve to allow the player to use more of the powers and weapons given to us, a problem which will be solved in later entries of the series. When doing low chaos, searching the world becomes kind of pointless, as money is used to upgrade mostly your lethal means, gaining you more ammo you won't need, and finding money that outside of a few upgrades will be rendered pointless to have. So we have a system where non-lethal is implied to be the good way to play, allowing the player to see more content and obtaining the good ending while dealing with less rats, while also taking more than half of the player's arsenal completely out of the picture, relegated to only being used for distractional purposes. Are beginning to see the problem here? As mentioned before, I did a both high and low chaos run for this video to have a perspective on both paths of play, and I have to say that I had a lot more fun going on my combat murder spree at the expense of seeing the content that really does wonders to flesh out the world. With high chaos, however, once you murder all the guards, it essentially kind of leaves the play space basically empty, allowing you to just run from place to place to finish the objective, taking almost half the time as the low chaos run would net you. And while fun and completely viable, the more complete experience I feel is had when attempting to sneak your way through the levels. I love stealth games, and as a major fan of games like Splinter Cell and Metal Gear Solid 5, Hitman, and more, and while there are some aspects of this game that are kind of busted for stealth, like guards seemingly wearing horse blinders and not being able to look up despite everything going on above them, I found the stealth in Dishonored to be a great time. Slinking through shadows, finding forgotten paths to the next area, choking people out over and over and over and over again never stopped being satisfying to me, and even more so with the aerial knockouts from the rafters above. With the inclusion of a quick save and quick load feature, it makes it easy to attempt different approaches to an area, which can be rewarding. However, this system also makes it easy to save in an area for which you failed, resorting to a quick load whenever the shit hits the fan, leaving your choices to be quickly erased if it leads to something that didn't quite fit with the playstyle you were going for. While I do enjoy having these features, I also kind of wish that they weren't included here in Dishonored, as that would lead to more of what an immersive sim sets out to do, that being to follow your choices to their natural conclusion, no matter what the outcome, forcing a player to contend with situations that they didn't mean to run into, either due to lack of foresight or a basic lack of skill. I really could go either way on this system, as I could see the merits of it and actually used it a lot. However, I think the design would be inherently more interesting if the player was left to clean up their mistake in any way possible, thus having a more fluid interaction with the world and having the player's actions have weight to it, as one wrong misstep could have you drop into a pack of guards, forcing you to kill or be killed. Is this more hardcore? Yes, but the choice and consequence of every move you make is tantalizing to me. But while I do wish that the high chaos playthrough had its own content or way to entice you to go in swords blazing, Dishonored is a blast to play through, a power fantasy filled with cool powers, cool gadgets, awesome enemy designs like the tall boys, and basically everything in between. It's a treat to come back to Dunwall just to explore, drink up the scenery, slink in the shadows, and dismantle the usurpers of the throne along the way.
Which in conjunction with a...
But going back to the beginning, how does this relate back to the immersive sim qualities discussed before? What makes Dishonored, in the eyes of many, a great immersive sim, taking out the inherent flaws of the chaos system introduced to the loop of play? While this system works to give the world overarching reactivity to the player, I do still feel that it is inherently prodding the player to adopt a playstyle that in turn hurts that immersive sim in it. But as we said, we're taking that out. And with that being done, Dishonored fulfills the major trapping the genre has that makes it so unique of an experience to play through. It all starts with the level and world design. Making your way through the game, you're dropped into condensed open areas, as mentioned before, with each one being filled with opportunity. The rules of the world are always at play. NPCs will react to the inputs in the world, thus giving the player an infinitum amount of ways of dealing with any given situation. Let's look at a specific area. The first mission where you need to take out the High Overseer. We have reached the main entry to the palace, that is the headquarters for the Golden Mask Zealots, and in looking through our spyglass, we have guards stationed all around the exterior, all ready to lay waste to us once we show ourselves. Looking around, there are ledges, doors, crawl spaces, and windows, all able to be used to infiltrate the complex and make our way closer to the target. It is here that the qualities of the immersive sim actually shine, as the world is our oyster here. We can blink to skirt along lampposts, reaching the ledge and entering through a window. In turn, we can drop down to assassinate the two guards closest to the front door and just waltz our way through the front. We can murder our way through the entire front line, or we can dive off to the side and enter through the kennels. You can attach a spring razor mine to a bottle, yeet it at a guard, but using our makeshift grenades, we can use an actual grenade. Dishonored allows the player to use any of these options and a ton more, as long as it follows the rules of the world. And the same can be said for something as simple as a locked door. Is it made of wood? Well, we could blast it down, given that we're willing to sacrifice the noise level in doing so. Or if we're trying to be more stealthy, we could wait for the guard to come by and unlock the door himself. We can also search for that said guard and steal the key from his back pocket and unlock it ourselves. We can go to the higher overseer, steal the master key, and unlock any door in the building. We can even go around the outside to try and get in through a window, barring that it's not barred up with iron supports. It would make sense that the cleaning crew or the servants would have a key to this door, so we could also go find where they sleep at and see if there's a key there as well. This game allows the player the freedom and creativity to solve any problem in front of them in any way they see fit, as long as it fits, once again, within the context of the world. This is where the smaller level design comes in as an asset, as Arkane has specifically made different challenges and pain points for the player, no matter what mode of solving the problem they've decided to go down, adding to the simulation along the way that makes any route taken a little bit more interesting. This is what gives the player that satisfaction of completing an area, as their agency in the world does not only allow them to reach the final goal, but make them feel like the smartest motherfucker alive in the process. The freedom can be daunting for some, especially in an age where it seems that games are specifically made to handhold the player into solving problems, leading the player to the predetermined solution rather than allowing said player to solve it themselves. This is why the loop of Dishonored is so great in my eyes, and keeps me wanting to come back for another run through. I find a game that leaves the breadcrumbs for the player to follow or not, rather than the game that hands you the loaf of bread, much more satisfying to go through. This even trickles down to the way that the player handles the elimination of the main target themselves. Each mission hinges on an assassination as discussed above, but murder isn't the only option these targets can be eliminated by, given the low chaos system and the game even having achievements for 0 murders. In this, every target can be handled in a multitude of ways, but there is a weird strange dissonance between murder and non-lethal, with honestly sometimes murder being kind of the more noble answer. The High Overseer, you can give a brand of the heretic, leading to his exile into the flooded slums below, where then he turns into a weeper or somebody that's infected with the rat plague. If we look at Lady Boyle, you go and you can knock her out and give it to this rat face motherfucker, who essentially takes her away on a boat to live with him for the rest of her days. Yeah, that would be content censored if we followed that trail to its natural conclusion. There is something to be said with what goes around comes around, but honestly, death would be the better outcome than subjecting this woman, no matter how cruel, to being a slave to someone who thinks dressing up like a fucking rat is cool. Anyway, let's get back on track. The amount of freedom given to the player here is vast, and in that regard, Dishonored in my eyes is easily considered one of the greats when looking at the genre of immersive sims. While there are games that do this better, like the most recent Deus Ex games or Arkane Austin's own Prey, which there'll be a video about in the future, it's hard to ignore the influences and trapping Dishonored has had on the immersive sim. I may be way off base on that, and I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on the topic, so feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I love to read them, and most of the time we'll actually respond, so definitely keep an eye out for that as well. But with gameplay being tight, there needs to be a reason why we're here, so let's take a look at the story of Dishonored, what it does right, and what it misses on. Obviously, we're going to be delving deep into the spoilers section of this video, so if you haven't played Dishonored yet, you've been warned. Don't come crying later that I spoiled something for you.
Take him.
Bringing it back to the beginning of the video, we are beset on a path of revenge after being accused for the murder of Empress Jessamine, also known as Corvo's Honey Boo Boo, and being locked up in jail. Corvo mysteriously gets a key, claiming to be from a helpful party that wants to see him free, believing he's not responsible for the murder, and wanting to exact revenge on the true culprits of the plot, the High Regent Hiram Burrows and his cronies in power. Escaping the jail, crawling through the sewers, Corvo meets Sam, a lowly boatman who we will get to know very well, as he acts our way in and out of each encounter and plays a larger role much later in the game. Sam gets a lot of screen time in Dishonored, essentially being the bearer of backstory for Corvo on the world of Dunwall, how it's changing with its increase of industrialization, with the rich getting richer and the poor becoming poorer, and those poor people being more put upon from the powers above. Knowing his place at the bottom of the ladder, knowing his place as the lowly fisherman, it's hard to not like Sam and the role he plays, as he is essentially the constant for Corvo, both in and out of missions. You can tell he holds a ton of respect for Corvo as well, the way he speaks to him and is willing to help him out, even when the tough gets going. This can change based off the chaos level, but we'll get there. Taking you to the Hound's Pit pub, we meet Havelock, a former admiral of the Navy, and Trevor Pendleton, a nobleman and co-leader of the Loyalist faction, who wish to see Emily returned rightfully back to the throne of Dunwall. Together, these two are working to dismantle the current regime and pushing to have Emily, Jessamine, and Corvo's daughter put back in charge, due to the actions taken by the Lord Regent upon her assassination. We also meet Piero, the inventor, who goes about ensuring Corvo is sufficiently supplied for the missions ahead, also creating his own iconic mask worn to mask the identity of Corvo. Piero seems brash and abrasive, and becomes even more scummy the more we learn about him, eventually finding him creeping on the local help while they're bathing. I mean, seriously, this guy kind of sucks, but he's helpful, so we keep him around. It is also here that we meet the enigmatic force known as the Outsider, a spiffy man with cold, dead black eyes we find in the void. Branding Corvo with his mark, he bestows the otherworldly powers we possess in the game, and it's clear that there is more to this guy than we realize. Finding shrines throughout the world, the Outsider also serves to show and tell the player more about the seedy aspects of Dunwall. Locating these shrines, finding fellow worshippers like Granny Rags throughout the level, we also see a ton of iconography to the Outsider throughout Dunwall. This is forbidden, as we will learn by paying attention to the world around us. The overseers of the Abbey disavowing and forbidding any sort of talk about the Outsider, citing him and his cult to be a dark force bent to bring the city to its knees. It's not clear really who's the bad guy here, as the Outsider is the guy who does help us and give us our powers, and assist Corvo with information along his path for revenge. But in hearing about how the Abbey thinks of him, it's clear that there's another side that we may not know. But who can refuse these badass powers like Possession, Rat Swarm, Blink, and Darksight? And while we can learn more about the backstory of the Outsider in lore books scattered throughout the world, he becomes a far more important figure in the games to come. So we'll get into more of him when we get there. But there is no denying the vast importance of the role he plays here in this world. And while many people believe in him, he gives his power to few, including Corvo. Corvo begins his work with the Loyalists, and the plan so far seems solid, but first we must need to get Emily back. So with that charge, Corvo ventures into Dunwall, murdering those disloyal to the throne and saving Emily. After taking out the High Overseer and learning of Emily's whereabouts, Corvo ventures into the Golden Cat, a pleasure palace where the rich get their rocks off, and after taking care of the Pendletons by either murdering or sending them with cut-out tongues to work in the mines with the help of local gang leader Slackjaw, we find Emily locked away in a room where the prostitutes sleep, and upon bringing her back to Sam, head back to the Hound's Pit pub. Here, Emily wanders the space, referencing the actions of Corvo and changing how she views the world based on said action, becoming more vengeful and murderous in the high chaos scenario, or more empathetic and kind in the low chaos. Emily serves as the reflection of the player on the playthrough thus far, and in these interactions with her, you can see how she truly cares for Corvo, giving him drawings, checking if he's okay, and just generally giving a shit. I mean, he is her dad after all. Corvo ventures out again, this time for a slightly different mission, the abduction of royal physician and inventor Anton Sokolov, whose contraptions he built with science of the world can be seen throughout Dunwall. While in this mission there is no target to murder, we must get Sokolov out alive so he can give us information on how to get to the Lord Regent. So we set out and grab this old coot and lock him up in the pub. He gives us information on Lady Boyle, who's funding the Lord Regent's rise to power, while also giving him a bit of, extra if you catch my drift. So off goes Corvo again to take out Lady Boyle and find a way to get to the Lord Regent himself. Upon doing so, Corvo heads off to do what he does best, and after dispatching the Lord Regent himself, returns to the Hound Pit pub. The end finally here, or so he thinks. And see, Havelock and Pendleton have risked a lot and done a lot of terrible things to get to this point, and knowing of Corvo's relation to Emily, does not want any loose ends hanging about him. Instructing Sam to poison Corvo's celebratory beer, he is incapacitated, but thanks to Sam's respect for Corvo, he only was given a half dose, essentially just knocking him out. We wake up in the flooded district under guard of some men in plague masks. And this is where we meet Dowd, the true assassin behind Lady Jessamine, and once Corvo wakes, moves to take care of Dowd once and for all. The only issue is, he and his men retain the same powers as Corvo, blessed by the Outsider as well, making this area not only one of the toughest areas of the game, but unfortunately one of the slowest. This may be the only mission I actually hate in this game, as traversing the flooded district is slow. It is here that the enemies who are on your level do feel a bit unfair. But we make it through, and upon his defeat, Dowd begs Corvo for forgiveness, which we can choose to grant or not. Now lore-wise, though, as we will learn in upcoming games, it is canon that he's spared, which I actually hate, as this pinnacle choice is basically null and void if we play any of the next games in the series. We will learn a lot more about Dowd real soon, but he's a truly important character to the lore and story of Dishonored, so much so that he got his own 2-part DLC for this game as well, which we'll get into here in a little bit. Corvo, making his way back to Dunwall, returns to the Hound's Pit pub to find it overrun with guards, searching for the rest of the crew, like Piero and Sokolov, and upon his return, learns Emily was taken by the Loyalists, but has not been returned to the throne, as power corrupts here in Dunwall, absolutely. Returning to the room Emily was held in, we find her stewardess telling Corvo that Sam is awaiting for his return in the water, waiting for a sign from the flare set up in the window, having never truly given up hope in the royal protector. After saving Sokolov and Piero, now working together on amplifying a shock machine that will either explode or incapacitate all the guards, Corvo boards the ship with Sam and heads to Dunwall Castle, settling the score with his betrayers and saving his daughter once and for all. It's here that we need to take a moment to discuss the high and low chaos playthroughs for a moment, as this is where a lot of the changes in the story really begin to take shape. During high chaos, as mentioned before, we see more rat swarms that will eat any flesh nearby, with other major changes being how people in your inner circle begin to interact with Corvo. As mentioned before, Emily will change her outlook on the world based on the amount of killing you do, as will everybody else in the Hound's Pit pub. The stewards will reflect on you poorly for taking so many lives, Piero will make comments on your lethality, and most of all, the outlook of Sam, and that he has on Corvo, can change drastically based on the chaos level that you're going down. This may be the hardest hitting change for me, and it all comes to a head in the final approach to Dunwall Castle. I tend to always play these games with high stealth and less murder, much like how, no matter how hard I try, I always play Paragon and Mass Effect, and lean to the light side in games like KOTOR. It's not my nature to be a bad guy. So color me surprised to see how different these two entrances to the final mission are with Sam. In low chaos, Sam commends you for staying your sword despite all the wrong being done to Corvo leading up to this point. Losing your kid, losing your girl, being betrayed not once but twice would generally be enough to send anybody on a killing spree. Citing you as an example to live by, he wishes you luck as he brings you to shore, knowing you'll succeed and continue to be a great role model for Emily and Dunwall as a whole. However, in high chaos it is much different, as Sam condemns you for being no better than the men who betrayed you, feeling sorrow for any influence Corvo has had over Emily, and even once dropping you off, fires his pistol in the air, alerting the guards to your arrival while floating off, never to meet you again.
I'm gonna tell them you're coming.
Condemning any city that would ever allow Corvo near a seat of power. I have to say, this high chaos interaction with Sam completely caught me off guard, as this small reminder of the murder spree you caused, and to see how the impression of Sam changes was so drastic. So much so, he attempts to go and get you caught and killed. While I wish there was a bit more nuance here, the stark contrast of how Sam sees you at the beginning to the end in the high chaos state was stark, and left a much larger impression on me than any other change. Dishonored ends pretty much how you think it will. Corvo gets his revenge against the men he thought were his allies and saves Emily, and we reach the epilogue. Both of these distilling down to the most extreme states. High chaos leading Dunwall to essentially being overrun with the rat plague, while Emily exacts further brutality and revenge from the throne, whereas in low chaos, the plague essentially is cured by Sokolov and Piero, and Emily learns to be a kind ruler, both with Corvo by her side. Again, much like Sam, I do wish that there was a bit more nuance here rather than just distilling everything down to extremes, but for me, Dishonored is much more about the journey than the final destination, which is fine. Overall, the story of Dishonored is a solid one, with the betrayal to set the stage to give the reason for the player to go about his assassination spree, only to be betrayed again and become an army of one, working to save the true heir to the throne, honor the name of your woman Jessamine, and save your daughter. While the second betrayal did catch me off guard for the first time playing, it also makes a ton of sense why this would happen, as the initial lead up to the end felt super fast, in which a further betrayal just kind of kept everything a bit more interesting. I do think that the flooded district section, however, was a pace killer set in the mid to end game, and while Dowd is interesting, this area could have been cut by about 2/3 and been just as fine, despite the fact that Dowd becomes a thing and is dispatched of pretty quickly, despite the fact that he basically sets the entire stage for the game, which is why it makes sense that DLC was made to follow the journey of Dowd. And I have to say that minus some issues that I have with the narrative, this is some of the strongest DLC content I've played in any game, so let's touch on it before this video gets a little bit too long.
One blood I've spilled. Another noble steps in to replace the last one. All equally corrupt.
The entirety of the DLC story is split into two acts, the Knife of Dunwall and the Bridgemore Witches. Taking place in Dowd's eyes, we begin with the assassination of Jessamine and how he was pulled into the void the moment he stabs the Empress, the outsider telling him in riddles that his story will end soon, that which will be determined on him finding a woman named Delilah. This being a mystery, much like anything the outsider is involved in, Dowd puts it out of his mind until he gets word of an arriving ship named Delilah. Going through a meat plant in downtown Dunwall, we learn more of Delilah, that she is a witch who also controls the powers of the void, and appears a few times to tell Dowd to basically stop searching for her. After reaching the flooded district, Dowd finds his base overrun by overseers, and upon dispatching them learns that his second in command, Billy Lurk, was working with Delilah the entire time to usurp him. This ending again changes depending on chaos, but essentially Dowd can either kill or spare Billy, which again, this choice is ruined based off of canon, because it's obvious given the protagonist of Death of the Outsider that Billy is spared. However, Dowd is not done with Delilah just yet, as he continues to track her down to stop whatever mysterious plan she has. After saving another bandit from the prison and using her ship, Dowd reaches Bridgemore Manor to learn of Delilah's plan, that being to possess Emily on the throne, making her Delilah's puppet in order to control Dunwall, which is ultimately thwarted by Dowd in one of three ways: killing her, knocking her out, and switching the painting that she's using to possess Emily, or completing the ritual himself, sealing Delilah away in the void. Either way, the plan is foiled, and we end where we meet Dowd in the campaign, begging for his life, having murdered an empress, but saving one to repent for his past. This synopsis is diluted a lot, but a lot of this story really hones in on Dowd as a flawed character, attempting to seek redemption in his own eyes. While a lot of the missions themselves come off as kind of just busy work for him getting the answers that he's looking for, these also may be some of the best levels in this game has to offer, with 2/3 of them being completely new locations altogether. We also learn that a lot of what the outsider does in this world is pit others against each other, seemingly enjoying the response his puppets have on the greater world with no rhyme or reason behind them. As I said, we learned a lot more about the outsider in later games, so we'll save that in his time for later. Overall, this DLC is honestly a must play in my eyes, and having handled the nuance of Dowd far better than even Corvo in certain scenarios, I was truly impressed. Having a voice for Dowd helps a lot, and it's not hard to really fall in love with that character, despite him literally studying the events with a terrible crime at the beginning of the entire game. I adore this DLC, and honestly, I love Dishonored as a whole. It had been a while since last playing it, so it really was a treat to go back to and play 2 times over again for this video. From loving stealth and immersive sims, this game is a treat, and while I have some issues at the core of the chaos system and some character nitpicks here and there, this game is almost a masterpiece in my eyes. This going back confirmed that I wasn't the one who was the problem, but changes made in Deathloop are what actually pushed me away from that game. This feeling only being more solidified as I continue down the backlog of Arkane games, and while personally I don't think the other 2 hit nearly as well as this one, it was nice to go back and play something that was, in my eyes, peak Arkane. Are there problems? Sure, but as a package, and especially if you're subscribed to Xbox Game Pass, this game is a no-brainer for me to play.
I felt this so long ago. The void. It was still there all along.
When we open the game for the first time and hop into the tutorial, we are playing as Emily, training with Corvo, her protector and father, on the basis of movement, stealth, and combat. We see the relationship now tighter after 15 years of being together, with Emily now knowing that Corvo is in fact her father, a fact that really wasn't flaunted in the original, more like a hush-hush secret that you would be able to piece together if you were paying attention. It is the anniversary of the day of the murder of their mother and side chick, Lady Jessamine, with Emily and Corvo headed to court, discussing Emily's night escapades and the danger of it with the crown killer on the loose. You see, there's a serial murderer in Dunwall, and given how those murdered are those who oppose the rule of Corvo and Emily, there are flowing rumors, and rightfully so, that the 2 are behind the crimes, despite the lack of proof of these allegations. As the 2 take their place on the throne, they are interrupted by a Duke Luca Abel, that who claims to truly be the rightful heir of the throne, Delilah. Claiming to be the half-sister of Lady Jessamine, the court is attacked. Corvo uses his blinking power to try and stop Delilah, and has his power sucked away, turning him basically into a normal dude, and jumping to his aid, Emily joins the fray, where we reach our first choice of the game. You see, Dishonored 2 has 2 main protagonists, Corvo and Emily, each with their own unique powers, which we'll get into here in a bit. Upon choosing one, the other is frozen into stone, and your character is locked in Dunwall Tower, awaiting their execution. While this introduction is indeed explosive and kicks off the events of the game, a pace that only TikTok could set, it is here that my problems with this game actually begin. Looking back at the original, there was a build-up to the action that allowed the player to assess the stakes, learn of the world and its characters at play, while also introducing you to the systems and mechanics that we'll be using throughout. We're introduced to Corvo and his role in the world. We play hide and seek with Emily to learn the stealth mechanics, while getting a glimpse of the 2's relationship. We learn of the rat plague affecting Dunwall. We see whales being harvested for their oil and meet Anton Sokolov, famed inventor and artist, all culminating in Dowd's murdering of Lady Jessamine before Corvo was branded a traitor and taken to jail. There's a build-up that allows the player to get invested, continuing through the jailbreak sequence, where the game then takes its time to just teach you the mechanics of actually playing, while still being immersed in the immediate plot. In Dishonored 2, we spend 3 minutes speaking with Corvo, with 2 of those actually being optional in a segmented tutorial that is entirely skippable if you're not new to the series, to then have Emily booted from the throne and one of the 2 main protagonists frozen by a character who you could literally kill the last time we saw her in the Brigmore Witches DLC of the original, which begins another main gripe I have with this game, that being the reintroduction of Delilah. Leaving the pacing to the side, even though it really hinders this introduction, I can't fathom why Arkane decided to actually bring Delilah back as being the main antagonist for Dishonored 2. As an antagonist to Dowd in his DLC, she was a far better character, serving as a reflection of Dowd himself, even down to the plot of possessing Emily in an effort to take control of the throne. Thus, in murdering or stopping her, it allowed Dowd to get some semblance of redemption for his past crimes for murdering Lady Jessamine, by saving Emily from the very same fate, killing one crown to save another. So when this same character shows up with basically the same plan, albeit more physical and altercation this time, it was hard for me not to just kind of roll my eyes and the recycled ideas that made their way into this game again. It also, in reverse, stripped the player of the choices that they made in the original, something that this game does a few more times throughout its runtime. Yes, this sequel was unplanned when creating the original, but that should not stop the player's ability to choose from being respected, even if it did release for years later. It would be like if you played Mass Effect 1 and murdered Rex, only for him to come back in the second game, making the player's choice obsolete in the process. And when one of the original game's main themes is choice and consequence, as can be seen throughout the runtime of the original, it just feels wrong to have this choice retconned and stripped away like, JK, your murder of her never actually happened. Getting back to Dishonored 2, I also lament the amount of time that we have to spend with our two main protagonists, Corvo and Emily. This relationship was key in the original as mentioned before, due to the nature of them being father and daughter, and Corvo literally doing everything in the first game to make sure that she was actually, safe. So when we reach the second game and we only spend somewhere between 90 seconds and 3 minutes where these two interact at all, it doesn't allow for sufficient time for the player to actually give a shit as to why the other one was frozen in stone. As a concept, I don't mind the idea of having two playable characters, as it does enhance the replayability of this game given how differently these two can play. But there should have been more time for these two to actually interact, to allow the player to actually care. Do a mission together or something. This cheapens the stakes for both returning players who would be anxious to see these two's relationship after 15 years, or for new players who don't know anything about Emily and Corvo, and then making them wonder why I even care that one of them is frozen in stone. It all feels rushed and hurried, trying to get the player to the action faster, sacrificing the core of a narrative to achieve this, which feels like a misguided error. Dishonored 1 allowed the player to explore, learn, interact with the world, building the stakes and giving reasons to care about what happens to Dunwall. Dishonored 2, on the other hand, doesn't seem to worry about any of that, wanting the player to experience the gameplay as quick as humanly possible while sacrificing the narrative in the process. Continuing back to the game, after being locked away, you escape the tower and head to the waterfront, where a strange ship can be seen in the dock. Heading there, we meet Megan Forrester, captain of the Dreadful Whale, who claims she has been wanting to speak with you upon her arrival about a plot to usurp the thrones told to her by Anton Sokolov. She offers to take you to Karnaka, the place where Delilah began her rise to power, and also where Duke Luca Abel is from, as well as Corvo if you're playing as him. Surely there will be answers here, so the two sail off. As you sleep, you're visited by the Outsider, who offers you his powers once again, with either Corvo or Emily being given different ones. An interesting choice appears where you can actually outright deny his powers, forcing the player into a run with no supernatural powers whatsoever. We'll discuss the implications of this during gameplay, so let's table that for now. He tells you about the evils of Delilah and tasks you with stopping her, which is something it seems obvious you're already set out to do. We practice with our powers, grab the heart, now imbued with the spirit of Lady Jessamine, and return to the Dreadful Whale, now having arrived in Karnaka, the Jewel of the South.
Last time I saw Karnaka, I was just 18, boarding a ship bound for Dunwall.
In the last video, I heaped a ton of praise on the world building of Dishonored, the attention to detail paid to almost all elements of Dunwall, from set dressing, world lore, and the inclusion of detail in almost every explorable space made Dunwall an unforgettable setting. In Dishonored 2, we end up in Karnaka, a continent to the south of Dunwall, while still being a part of the kingdom itself. Crowned as the Jewel of the South, the setting of Karnaka is vastly different than Dunwall, but surprisingly just as detailed and fascinating as its predecessor location. Being a port town and a tourist destination for the nobility of Dunwall, you can see on the upper streets the lavishness of the apartments, the bustle of the markets at the port are full of customers and locals, and the luxurious mansions we explored during the game's runtime create more of a dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots. While the upper crust have some pretty fancy digs, the seedy underbelly of Karnaka is just as present. Black market shops littering the locations, the slums run down, the seawater air decaying the shacks, littering the waterfront and the canals throughout the city, harboring all manners of smugglers, bums, and the like. The class dichotomy in Karnaka is just as stark as Dunwall, if not more. However, there is a larger issue plaguing the city, that being the bloodfly infestation. Serving as the chaos mechanic of Dishonored 2, the bloodfly infestation is your parallel to the rat plague of the first, with more killing and violence besetting more bloodfly nests upon Karnaka. However, unlike the rat plague, which infested just the lower areas of Dunwall, the bloodflies can be found anywhere, but predominantly taking residence in the higher up apartments of the nobles. This leads to the nobility pouring out into the streets, being displaced by the infestation, leaving Karnaka to really feel just abandoned to time, like a once great society, now a mere husk of its glory days. Apartments abandoned, windows boarded, buildings in complete lockdown, all to combat the spread of the bloodflies, give a sense of eeriness to Karnaka, making some of these apartments we can explore through seem more like a horror game setting in some areas. This all makes the level design of Karnaka to feel much larger as well, as these standing tall apartments to go through give a ton more verticality to the level design than Dunwall, littered with tons more runes, bone charms, and the like for the player to find, a carrot to seek while we explore the ruined land. Using the Heart of Jessamine, you can also explore the inner turmoils of the local populace as well, seeing their thoughts, their innermost desires, and whether they're a bad person or not. It turns out that in Karnaka almost everybody's a bad person, so by the standards of the chaos, it really would be less chaotic if you decided just to kill everybody, but that's a moral obligation that we're not going to get into at this time. It is an awesome touch though, and I'm glad that it was once again reintroduced here in Dishonored 2. However, Karnaka isn't without its geopolitical problems either, as the current Duke Luca Abel has created a police state throughout the city. You hear announcements of workers of the silver mines being repressed, subject to search and seizures at the whim of the Grand Guard. Foreigners are treated with similar disdain, being side-eyed and questioned just for walking in the streets. This also gives the guards a reason to hunt you down, minus your face being plastered all over the walls, but you know, it's covered. This cannot be better portrayed than our venture into the Dust District, an old worker area that used to be there in support of the local silver mine, all under the tutelage of Artemis Stilton. At a time, this area was pretty nice, as the silver operation was making everyone loads of cash and the getting was good. However, upon the appointment of the Duke, work quotas were doubled, the mine stripped dry, leaving an entire area once devoted to trade to be left to rot once the silver was gone. Much like the old coal mining towns that we've seen in West Virginia, here in the United States, once the boom was over. A husk of its former glory and forgotten to time. Sand and dust have built around these structures, and the workers there that are left are essentially just forgotten about, the Grand Guard not even being present here, instead being run by the local gang, the Howlers, and the overseers of the Abbey of the Everyman. You know, the gold-faced guys that we see in Dishonored 1. As the game progresses, it is clear that the Duke has brought Karnaka to ruin, so reading the notes and lore of the history of Karnaka and comparing it to how we see it in the events of Dishonored 2 serves to paint a dichotomy of the city between the times of its heyday and comparing it to now. In relating to how the city lends to the gameplay, Arkane has knocked it out of the park once again when it comes to exploration of the space and how the space translates to the immersive sim genre. Karnaka is large, much larger than Dunwall, and Arkane wasted no space here where the vastness of the level design has a ton of implications when it comes to the gameplay front. Much like Dishonored 1, its sequel follows pretty much the same pattern, that being go to the hub area, get mission, surrounded by story and set dressing, go to the level and be given a task. How you complete said task is completely up to you, and with the amount of space given to the player in Dishonored 2, really lends in giving more options to how to get to said target, with a lot more pathways leading to the assassination targets, each with their own obstacles, makes every playthrough widely different. There's one major flaw I have with this, and that relates to the initial choice the player must make, that being which character they choose to play with. While on its face it is a great idea, as not only does it have the potential to flesh out more lore and story from a different perspective, but having a complete different set of powers makes each run through that much more different than the other. However, this also means that every puzzle must be achievable with either character, and with the choice the player has of rejecting the powers of the outsider as well at the beginning, this also means that every puzzle must be solvable while using no powers as well. While again, on the surface these choices are cool and do make the game function vastly different than the other, this also limits the amount of challenge presented in each location. If any puzzle is meant to be solved with a single jump, accounting for the lack of powers, this means that doing a run through with powers makes it far easier to navigate. I mean, think about it. Jump can only go so high, but your blink or shadow step can take you 2.5 times farther. What's to stop you from jumping over almost every obstacle or navigating to set objective from basically roof to roof? Well, nothing, which is how you can solve basically 70% of the level design of Karnaka. Not for a choice few, and we will get to those, but with a lot of the run up to each interior level being outside in a lead up to said building, this makes these areas feel much more like busy work leading to the actual level. Dunwall had much of the same problem if we are to be honest with ourselves, but given how the player did not have a choice in how to take the powers, and that most of the levels comprised of both interior and exterior locations, it just wasn't as obvious. Like the Abbey level, for example, where you work your way inside from the exterior gate as opposed to making your way outside to hit a door and load into said level. That being said, Dishonored 2 also sports some of the best levels hands down in the series, and I would even dare to say in video games as a whole, that being the Clockwork Mansion and the Stilton Mansion, in the mission dubbed A Crack in the Slab. Let's begin with the Clockwork Mansion, home to the inventor Kiran Jindosh. This level is a masterpiece of level design that I haven't seen replicated even by Arkane ever since. Being a famous inventor of Karnaka, your mission is to go in, rescue Sokolov, and take care of Jindosh for good. Upon entering his estate, he's alerted to your presence due to pressure plates on the floor, asking who you are and why you're visiting. Upon pulling a lever in the main hall, the room transforms, every section of the room changing before your eyes, via moving plates on the floor. You could do this as many times as you want, swapping the room back and forth, until you realize that you also can get into the guts of the room by sneaking through the openings as the room shifts, allowing you to be able to move forward and deactivate the wall of light, heading further into the house. Most of the house is the same, the rooms ever shifting and allowing the player to exploit these transitions to get to your target. Never have I seen a level be designed as intricately as this one, as this mansion is a giant puzzle box for the player to solve, while also throwing the newly introduced clockwork soldiers into the mix. Giant bipedal mechanical robots, able to see out of both their front and back of their heads, and with armor built around them, makes them a pain in the ass to assassinate. You only really are able to get the prompt by attacking them from above. So we have enemies that function as a puzzle to murder us, and a level that is literally a puzzle to navigate, constructed to confuse and trap any intruders within. My first time playing through this level took me literally forever. I mean, it almost broke me, with every area being ever changing, making it a pain in the ass to find your way forward. A challenge which I'd still love to solve, even going back to this video and having to do 3 more playthroughs of it. Even the non-lethal assassination of Mr. Jindosh is a puzzle in and of itself, as once the player knocks Jindosh out, you need to basically microwave his brain, leaving him alive but destroying the very thing he's known for. Even this is a puzzle that you need to solve by using math and a little bit of logic in order to activate the machine, essentially just finding out which rooms give off the correct amounts of power in order to activate the machine. Even rescuing Sokolov is a puzzle and reaching him, activating pressure plates in a certain order to raise and lower walls, all while contending with a clockwork soldier in the area, making a ghost run a pain in the ass to go through. What I love about this level, minus the actual level design itself, is the fact that this serves more like a puzzle to the literal player in the literal sense of the word, rather than just a stealth and maneuvering set of problems. Contending with those as well, from contraptions that are a lot tougher than you, makes this level stand out as one of the greats. The Clockwork Mansion is dope, and I wish Arkane would go back to something of this design for other levels in games they make. Another standout, a crack in the slab, deal with the manipulation of time. Having your power sapped away at the start, you navigate your way to a crazed Artemis Stilton, only to meet with the outsider and receive an object that allows the player to manipulate time. Going between the past and present, the player must make their way into the locked rooms of the mansion in order to witness the birth of Delilah. This level is fascinating to play through, as the player is able to view 2 separate realities of one play space through the timepiece, and the seamless transitioning back and forth between past and present is not only a great puzzle element thrown into the level, but also gives direct feedback to how lavish the past of Karnaka was, juxtaposed to the rundown and rotting present. And seeing the fall from grace directly through the level design is not only great on a gameplay front, but does wonders in regards to the world building discussed before. This level, much like the time travel level in Titanfall 2, is not just a technical marvel, but leads to great gameplay moments as well. It is a level that I feel will continue to come up well years from even now as something that at the time and still today was basically a masterpiece. Arkane has a way with creating engaging and nuanced levels through their design and lore building, the thing that carries these games in a lot of ways. With its deep in-world storytelling and its consistent altering of the player's expectations for what's to come next on a gameplay front, something which Dishonored 2 has improved upon in spades from its original. I really do feel that these levels will be talked about for years to come and are really a must play, so if you haven't played through Dishonored 2 yet, you owe it to yourselves just to play through it just for these 2 levels alone. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. Dishonored 2, as sequels should, expands upon every system from the original in an effort to bring it to new heights, and Arkane here hasn't disappointed as well. Many of the options are still the same, sporting a sword and a gun, crossbow, and magical powers. And if you're playing as Corvo, literally the same powers from Blink to manipulate time to Darksight that we had in the first one. I mean, Corvo basically just is the same person as he was in the original. However, it seems Arkane realized the lack of diversity options for the stealth player, as we discussed in the last video, and there are a lot more tools given to help that out. We still have these spring razor mines, which can still be attached to throwable objects in the world to make makeshift grenades, flashy sword kills, a devastating pistol, and crossbow bolts for the lethal yet sneaky. However, the original game had 3 times more choices for killing motherfuckers as there were to the kind-hearted players like myself, attempting to do a low chaos run and keeping our murder to a minimum. With the return of the sleep dart, we also now have the stun mine, which acts much like the spring razor death machine, but as the name entails, stuns rather than kills, allowing the player to set non-lethal traps for their unsuspecting victims. We see the return of the sleep dart, which feels as clean as it ever did, but now we also have the poison dart, which stings the guards, causing them to run off in pain while also grabbing the attention of nearby foes as well. Coupling that with the amount of bone charms that allows for Corvo and Emily's powers to be non-lethal, and even without those, most of Emily's powers can be used for non-lethal purposes. I like Emily's new powers a lot, and seems to have a ton more utility as well. Her shadow grab, which is the equivalent to Corvo's blink, can be upgraded to pull bodies towards you. The shadow stealth ability allowing her to move more covertly, even in broad daylight, as she's basically transformed into a giant shadowy tentacle monster. And the domino ability is pretty much busted, with being able to link up to 4 guards together so you can knock them all out at one time, i.e. you knock out one, you knock out all 4. With a limited amount of runes available, you must have to make these choices on what to take and what upgrades you want, letting the upgrades you choose have more weight when looking at the options you have to play with. I stuck with my tried and true Shadow Grab, Dark Sight, and Shadow Step build for this playthrough, which allowed me to quickly and quietly sneak past most areas with little to no detection. While with Corvo, I went with a no power, high chaos run, turning the entire run into a bloodbath, with no one, not even the maids and butlers, being left alive in my wake. However, combat feels far more punishing here, as guards do attempt to flank you from all sides, and the alarms seem to call a never-ending string of assholes to come and play, making this honestly way harder to pull off at times than even the first game. Recognizing that cool and flashy death animations are pretty fucking cool, Arkane also introduced the slow-mo shot when shooting an unsuspecting victim, making their deaths far more visceral than the last, much in the way that Sniper Elite slows time before you shooting a guy in the dick. Much like the first, no matter what option you choose, each way of playing feels equally rewarding, and this time there's also minimal missable content, say that 10 times fast, if you choose to go with high chaos. This plethora of options does a great job at making each experience unique to the player, a staple for the immersive sim. With guards also being far more perceptive in Dishonored 2 than its predecessor, stealth is also far more rewarding than the first, as well as it feels like a challenge now rather than kind of random about how far guards could see, or not having being able to look up in the original. The game feel in Dishonored 2 is far more fluid as well sprinting a line through buildings or roofs rather than the awkward bunny hop of the original. Your player actually just vaults over low cover, and rolling out of high drops makes this game feel far more parkour than the original as well. I think the games like Mirror's Edge, when looking at how sprint movement should feel, and Dishonored 2 feels much the same, continuing the flow state while sprinting to avoid enemy fire or ducking into the next bit of cover. The gameplay here feels far more fluid and intuitive to play through, which I can appreciate even while still loving the first game. Arkane really nailed the game feel here, and I feel like that for them must be commended for. But where the ball really does get drops is in the terms of the story, which is our final focus for this video, and naturally it'll be full of spoilers, so if you want to stay fresh on the narrative of Dishonored 2, now is the time to bow out. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in Death of the Outsider. Alright, are they gone? Alright, good. Now that the real ones are here alone now, let's get into the story, or what this game calls that. I won't be nice here, so let's just be forewarned.
The Empress. I don't think I'm very good at this.
You're still learning. Don't worry about the rabble-rousers, and we'll catch.
Dishonored 2 from a narrative perspective is honestly kind of a mess. From the rushed introduction, recycled characters, and lack of direction, it felt like that the narrative was designed only to bring you from an interesting location to an interesting location. As mentioned before, we have the choice of the 2 main protagonists, Emily Kaldwin and Corvo Itano. In interviews with Harvey Smith, the idea of playing Emily began at the very early stages of development, with the addition of Corvo being added later in order to give the player the choice to continue playing on as the royal protector we know and love from the original. However, it is painfully obvious that the rest of the game was written before the addition of Corvo. And with that decision now to have him voiced as well, Corvo comes off as entirely half-baked. Even in his voice acting, he sounds stilted, bored, and unimpressed, despite the fact that his daughter is now encased in stone and he's now been driven out of his home. Upon leaving Dunwall, we meet Megan Forrester, who looks painfully familiar to someone we know from the DLC of the original game, and Emily or Corvo head off to Karnaka in order to save Sokolov, and I guess learn more about Delilah along the way. It's not abundantly clear why Karnaka is so important, minus minus that Sokolov was captured there and the fact that the Duke, Luca Abel, is also from Karnaka, but regardless, off we go. Using the Dreadful Whale as a base of operations, much like the Hound Pit's pub from the original, we venture off into the many levels of Karnaka to save Sokolov and dispatch of the leadership cast of the nation, who is also affiliated with Delilah. And looking at the Dreadful Whale as a rest zone compared to the Hound Pit's pub, this area is woefully lacking outside of your own room where you can write in the journal to give more backstory to the thoughts of your character, which I did find myself reading after every level. Minus that, there's not much going on here outside of the conversations with Megan and Sokolov and heading to the skiff for the next mission. The Hound Pit's pub was far and away better than this. From the level of exploration of the area itself, the amount of characters just living their lives, Emily coming to Corvo with new drawings and reflecting on his choices, the Hound Pit's pub felt alive, as opposed to the Dreadful Whale, which feels like an awkward stopgap of a play space that really could have just been relegated to some cool cutscenes or something completely different. If I'm missing something here, please let me know in the comments down below, but this area just confused me coming from the original. There's also not much in the way of explaining why we are doing what we're doing at all, other than that this person may have been part of Delilah's cadre, or this person was important and corrupt and thus must be taken out. From Jindosh the inventor, Brianna Ashworth, curator of the Royal Conservatory turned witch, and the Duke, Luca Bell himself that we met in the beginning, we work our way through Karnaka, eventually learning of the seance that brought Delilah, I guess, back from the void, and that all these people we have been assaulting aided in bringing her back, reasons not explained to the player, which feels like a key detail needed for the player to actually understand why we're doing all this in the first place. We also learn that Delilah is in fact immortal, now having torn her soul apart and giving a piece of it to the Duke for safekeeping, allowing her to live forever. Eventually, we take care of the Duke and the piece of Delilah's soul being trapped in the heart, and we head back to Dunwall to take back the throne. If all of this has felt stilted and shallow, that's because it is. Dishonored 1's story was not the most complex in the world, but the wrappings of the overthrowing those who cast you out before, only to be betrayed again by the ones who were helping you, was interesting and created a motive as to why we were doing the things we're doing. I mean, we're dismantling all of Dunwall's upper crust in order to reinstate your own daughter into power, only to be toppled again. It's a little bit more interesting. The only target in Dishonored 2 that had any sort of major motive was Kirin Jindosh, because he is the one who captured Sokolov, and Duke Luca Abel, as he was the one who brought Delilah to Dunwall shores and was harboring a piece of her soul. Everyone else felt like a strange stopgap along the way. And while their levels exceed Dishonored 1 in mostly every way, the reason for being there was slim at best, making Dishonored 2 feel like a general romp through Karnaka with a small wrapping thread of a story. The return to Dunwall, however, is another standout level, but on a lore front. Before leaving the ship, we learn that Megan is really Billy Lurk, surprise surprise, responsible for killing Lady Jessamine in the original, in another lackluster reveal that any player of the original could have seen coming, and any new player probably wouldn't care about. You see her contend with the fact that she aided either the lover or daughter of the woman she helped murder, and this reveal really could have used much more of a spotlight than it actually did. However, this should have been a revelation for the player, showing emotion, betrayal, and the like, but instead it just kind of feels waved off, the player either choosing to kill her or just leave. This, I feel, was supposed to be sort of the Sam treatment that we got in the first one, where depending on your chaos level would determine if she told you or not, but lacks the impact that Sam's change actually had, as Megan was never really fleshed out as a character. She knew a lot, sure, but there's a lack of gusto for Megan, and really every character in Dishonored 2 that somehow sucks all the stakes out of everything. Upon reaching Dunwall proper, we see the destruction and death wrought by Delilah. Her witch is now taken over and finding local civilians hiding in blocked off alleyways, eating literal rats. That really gives a sense of despair that was beset upon the nation after Emily lost the throne. The world building in this level is out of control, as the once great nation of Dunwall is now a cesspit of death. There are only dogs guarding the entrance, no human left to stop our path, only seeing a dying overseer begging to have the blasphemer of Delilah stop. While if you took the outsider's power, he damns you to hell for even considering using those. We work our way up in the castle, now guarded by witches and clockwork soldiers, and meet Delilah, painting in the throne room. If you didn't play the DLC, painting gives her power over the void to control those she paints, which leads us to kind of the lethal and non-lethal endings. We can choose to kill her, murdering her in her void painting, retaking the throne and leaving her to rot, much like we did in the Brigmore Manor DLC, which obviously didn't work, but we'll get there. Or we can use the Black Bone Rune to sap her of her powers, leaving her inept and useless. I do have an issue with these outcomes as well, and not just from the fact that they were both options when we first dispatched Delilah in the DLC, which is obvious that it's probably not going to work again, given how she's the catalyst for the events that occurred in the entire game. Both of these were not given a grandiose-ness that a final boss encounter should actually entail, and this is doubly so with the fact that you can actually stealth kill her above the fight arena to take her out stealthily, which is a touch I can support for a ghost playthrough, but leads to having this entire ending feeling completely anticlimactic. It all just feels, once again, like the intro rushed, like we took care of her and now the game's done. No epic conclusion, just another target destroyed. We also have a choice of whether we want to free our dad/daughter and taking the throne alone, or taking the other one out of stone and ruling together. This choice, once again, feels kind of shoot-in, as what reason does the player have to either free their partner in the first place, seeing as how by this point of the game we've still only spent a grand total of 3 minutes with them, relying on the sole fact that these people are family, I guess, to free them. On the flip side, what choice is there in leaving them trapped in a rock prison, as they literally have done nothing to us? Once again, given the fact that there is no time spent building the relationship between Corvo and Emily. This all feels rather forced, and I feel this choice is just something to be added for the sake of creating a choice rather than building up a reason for it. If they had established some terrible reasons throughout the campaign as to why Corvo and Emily should or should not be freed, this choice would feel far more impactful, a reason for the player to care about their outcome. Instead, it just feels kind of fucked up to leave them in stone, meaning that unless you have some personal deep-seated family issues, you'll probably pick the free choice. I picked the shitty choice and left her encased in stone for the sake of the video, and even when picking it, it just felt like a non-starter of a choice, just a blip at the epilogue. Overall, the Dishonored 2 campaign, while having some good ideas at the core, felt simply like a shell of a story to guide the player from place to place, something which all stories inherently do, but unlike all the greats, the story works in sync with the levels and gameplay to create a whole package. I'm not saying that Dishonored 2 isn't great on a gameplay level, it's probably one of the best games I've ever played. However, it is marred with a poor story, no character development, and a shoot-in playable character in the form of Corvo entirely. It's hard to even care about what I was doing in the grand scheme of things. Gameplay in my eyes will always be king, but a story should do something to try to bring the player forward in a way they care about their choices, what they're doing, and why they're doing it. Karnaka is an amazing place to explore, with tons of lore and world building to find, but with the overarching story being lacking, this was a major detractor from my enjoyment of Dishonored 2. It's still a great game, but for the gameplay alone, and for that it's definitely worth playing. But if you're looking for a good story, this game isn't it. But I'm curious, what did you guys think of Dishonored 2? I could be completely off base here, so let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought of the story of Dishonored 2, and let's have a conversation. Now, I know there's going to be comments calling this video clickbaity and saying all these things to just be a sensationalist, and maybe I can sort of see where you're coming from, but this is really just how I feel about it. No bones, no shit, just straight talk. However, while the highs of Dishonored 2 are far higher than its predecessor, the lows are far lower in terms of story, which really kind of sucks for me. I wanted Dishonored 2 to be the GOAT, and when looking at it compared to its predecessor, it just doesn't stack up. And with that, I want to bring Dishonored 2 to a close. There's a lot I love about this game, stemming from the gameplay, level design, and world building. Karnaka is great and an amazing locale to explore, and with this game sporting 2 of the best levels ever made in immersive sim, stealth games, or video games to date, Dishonored 2 does wonders in bringing the genre and level design as a whole forward. So much so that there have been numerous videos, talks, conferences, and analysis of these 2 specific levels even today, a testament to the power of the Clockwork Mansion and the Crack in the Slab level. However, the experience wrapped in its meh story, stilted voice acting, and with the disparity of the playable characters, that being Corvo feeling just kind of shoved in at the last minute, keeps the sequel from surpassing its predecessor as an entire package. The highs are extremely high in Dishonored 2, but the lows are just as low. But what did you guys think of Dishonored 2?
Another relic from the old days. Still holds an edge, at least.
At the core of Death of the Outsider, this game is a blending and distillation of both Dishonored 2 as well as the story DLC for the original Dishonored, that being the Knife of Dunwall and the Bridgemore Witches. We play as Billy Lurk, also known as Megan Forrester in the second game, as we search for our old mentor Dowd. If you've played the original DLC, you'll know these 2 characters very well, as they served as the catalyst for all the events that have taken place in the series thus far, that being the murder of Empress Lady Jessamine at the very beginning of the first game. It appears Billy has had some recurring recurring nightmares, one where she loses her arm and her eye due to the Outsider's influence, now having located her former mentor in Karnaka, who's being held captive by a gang called the Eyeless. The Eyeless are a gang obsessed with the occult and the Outsider, experimenting and learning everything they can about the Void. Billy moves to rescue Dowd, who is being held captive in a boxing club run by these Eyeless, finding him attached to a device that is sapping Dowd of his powers. Upon freeing him, Dowd thanks Billy for rescuing him and asks her to help him on one more mission, one more assassination, to murder the man at the center of the chaos in the world of Dishonored, that being the Outsider himself. Billy agrees to help and the two meet back up on the Dreadful Whale, the ship we've seen in the previous game, ready to plot the murder of the mysterious purveyor of the Void. Remember when I said that we're going to be learning a lot about the Outsider in a future game? Well, this is that game. Returning to the Whale, we are visited once again by the Outsider, who is seemingly aware of the plot to murder him, and in taking our right arm and eye, bestow upon Billy powers, telling her that everything isn't as it seems to be, and that Billy has a lot more to learn. At this point, we sync up with Dowd, learning of a knife that will be needed to murder the Outsider, a ritual knife that was seemingly originally used to help create him in the first place, and thus, by logic, should be able to slay him as well. It's at this point we're off to the races, set out into the world of Karnaka again, this time to find a way to murder that who has been responsible for the seed of chaos in this world, one that we have seen in both games thus far, and seemingly a god, being the source of cryptic information and powers, all to sow the seeds of chaos within the world of Dishonored. Death of the Outsider is at its core a Dishonored game. We, the player, are dropped into a level with a set of objectives and told to solve them in whatever way we see fit. However, Death of the Outsider has a lot of tweaks into the formula that change it up from the first two games, making it a more streamlined and yet more open experience in the first two games as well. These two ideas feel diametrically opposed, but I promise that it all makes sense by the time I'm done. The biggest of the gameplay changes, in my opinion, comes in the form of the powers granted to Billy. As we have seen so far in the last two Dishonored games, not everyone's powers are the same, and here Billy is no different. Rather than having Blink or Shadow Pull from Corvo and Emily respectively, Billy has Displace, in which Billy places a marker of herself into the world that will exist there, allowing the player to teleport to it at any time as long as they're within eyesight of the displacement marker. This power at the front end felt a bit harder to use rather than Blink or Shadow Pull. However, once you begin to work with the power more and more, can lead to a ton of new scenarios that weren't possible with the other two powers before. As a movement ability, it works okay, but the way I love to use it as an oh shit button, allowing me to pull my ass out of a fire if either my plan went south, or even more effectively, being able to drop down to dispatch a target and instantly teleport back to safety, and honestly half the time before anybody even realized what happened, as long as you had planned to have your marker in line of sight appropriately, which I also screwed up a bunch as well. While as the movement ability it doesn't feel nearly as satisfying as Blink or Pull, the utility of it really does bring new additions to the table, and really this power kind of grew on me after a long period of time. We also have Semblance, where you take the shape of another NPC while also having full capabilities as if you were Billy, allowing you to basically hide in plain sight, or this is essentially to be able to move undetected, gain a lay of the land, or try to get into a specific location without triggering everybody to want to murder you. I think of the Eyeless bar in the second level in the Upper Syria district, where you need to go and find a NPC who's basically attached to a blood feeding tube for the Eyeless. You could sneak in and find your way through using Displace, or taking the form of a different Eyeless, you could walk in yourself without having to arouse any suspicion, make your way upstairs before the power runs out, thus allowing you to infiltrate the area with nobody knowing that you exist. There's a lot of utility here that could be used, and I really love Semblance, honestly, as it gives you really that Hitman feel that I crave, the hiding in the crowd scenario. Our final power we have is Foresight, essentially pausing time as Billy leaves her body to scout out what's ahead. This power seems pretty self-explanatory, but it's just to also, once again, get a lay of what's ahead of you without triggering everybody to be super pissed off. You can also place a displacement marker in this as well, so you can more effectively plan how you can make a line over to the next area, leaving a marker, taking a jump onto the next light post, and then jumping as far as you can to displace over to your marker. It's a pretty awesome technique, honestly. All these powers consume energy, and unlike the previous game, this one recharges over time and gets rid of the potion system altogether. A welcome change if I'm being honest, and one that doesn't allow for the ability spam we saw in the last two games if you had just stocked up on mana potions. Unlike Unlike the last two games too, these are the only powers we will get, minus Void Strike once we get the new sword. And we get them all right at the start of the second location. I actually love this change for the simple reason that puzzles can all be designed with these powers in mind. I brought this up into the Dishonored 2 video, but when you give the player an option to play with no powers, this in turn must mean that the game must be entirely beatable with no powers as well, making the challenge level for the entire game to have to cater to those who don't accept the outsider's blessing. This was the same for Dishonored 1. The baseline was much higher due to the fact that every player will always have at least the blink ability in their arsenal. That means if you bestow the player with 3 set powers, you can better craft levels, puzzles, and objectives to take advantage of those 3 powers in different ways. And it shows here in Death of the Outsider, as not only was this one of the most challenging Dishonored games for me if I'm being honest, but also maybe one of the best level designs in the series to date. While nothing will compare to the Clockwork Mansion or a Crack in the Slab, all of the original levels here are intricate winding paths, full of verticality, multiple ways of infiltrating, and tons of nook and crannies to explore. This exploration is further aided by the introduction of contracts to the world of Dishonored. Contracts essentially boil down to side objectives obtained at the black market, requiring ability to perform specific actions in the world in exchange for coin. These contracts will help expand the time in the world, giving you more challenges to perform to allow the player to play with the game systems in order to make a bit of coin for upgrade, like murdering a mime in a way that looks like a suicide. You must find a way to A. separate the mime from the onlookers, which I did by striking fear into the hearts of the audience. Then I chased the mime down a back alleyway, knocked him out with a sleep dart, and tossed him off a bridge to complete the contract. However, much like anything else you can do at Dishonored, the way you achieve this end goal is up to you, and that's the main reason why I enjoy these contracts. It's the small dopamine drip of making you feel like the smartest person alive, something which immersive sims in Dishonored do really well and condense them into focus areas, each one bringing a new puzzle. Some of these contracts are meh, if I'm being honest, asking you to only complete a mission without being seen, but as a concept, I do like how these ended up playing out, and it did wonders to keep me in the levels for much longer. My runtime for Dishonored Death of the Outsider was far longer than it was for Dishonored 2, despite the game having like 3 less levels than the previous title.
Look at us. Trapped here. An eternity on a butcher's block. Waiting for the knife to
The other biggest change brought in Death of the Outsider is the removal of the chaos system, one of which I've had contention with since the first game in the series. While the concept of your actions having an effect on the world is one that at its core I do appreciate, I also felt that the system was the main catalyst for pigeonholing most people into playing in a less lethal, more stealthy way, taking out the main quality of the immersive sim, that being you playing the way you want to complete said objective of the level. It always seemed antithetical to the core design of the immersive sim, so color me surprised when Death of the Outsider stripped all of that away. I actually loved this change as it felt like, for the first time, that I could play my way. Before, I would have to use quick saves and quick loads over and over again if I broke stealth or someone died as the result of the actions of the world. I would just zip back to a quick load and move on with my life. However, with taking the consequences of the chaos system out of Death of the Outsider, it felt like I had to live with what had happened in the world, rolling with the mistakes I made and somehow getting out of it, which was honestly freeing from a gameplay perspective. If I murdered someone, there wasn't a hidden tick against me, allowing me to roll with the punches as needed. For me, while there is a lack of change in the world based on my actions, the ability to act at how I saw fit without fear of punishment allowed the gameplay to feel more free. There is a trade-off to be sure, but for me the pros definitely outweigh the cons when it comes to this change. The other main change comes in the form of upgrades. In past games you could locate runes and bone charms hidden in the world in order to have some tangible change on your character. In Death of the Outsider, the runes have been stripped out as an upgrade token, instead having a trait associated with it, alternating your powers and movements of said trait. Couple this with the bone charms and actually feeling useful for once, and it feels like a lot more open with the builds you're able to make, rather than following the upgrade tree with the runes and having bone charms be less than stellar on the overall gameplay. While the sense of progression is somewhat lost, something which I feel that could have been addressed in a different way, I also felt like I was more tweaking my runes and charms more often than in previous games as well, changing the implicit traits to fit with the situation needed at the time. The prior games were hindered by the lack of respecking with a power or upgrade that didn't work for the given scenario, so having these be less permanent changes made good for some swapping and changing of how you were going to operate as an assassin. On a gameplay front, it feels that Death of the Outsider feels tight, changes made to help streamline the play experience and open up opportunities to feel like a badass, even with taking out all but 3 powers. While I wish there was maybe 1 or 2 more of these, having this number of options locked down made every puzzle and gameplay trial feel deliberate and crafted, unlike Dishonored 2 where the gameplay was was great, but cheesable for 80% of the experience. Unless of course you put your own limitations on the gameplay yourself, like no quick loading or no powers. Well, with the stripping of the chaos systems, as well as the new powers and gadgets, Death of the Outsider takes the shackles off of the punishment for murder, allowing the player to decide how to proceed. A freeing experience for myself in spite of the lack of consequences for my actions. All of this game, however, would be for nothing if not for level design in Death of the Outsider, which is something Arkane is definitely known for, so let's look at the level design here as well.
I thought I saw someone
have a
right
look
here.
around.
Let's check the place just in case.
It's safe to say that Dishonored 2 set a new bar when it comes to level creation, as seen in both the Clockwork Mansion and A Crack in the Slab. And while no level in this game comes close to even matching those two, the play spaces here in this standalone expansion are nothing to sneeze at. It would be easy for Arkane to just reuse levels from the games prior, and in going in through this experience, I was honestly expecting as much for at least half the missions like the DLC for Dishonored 1 had. So color me surprised to find out that there was really only one present here in Death of the Outsider, with all the rest being unique to this game particularly. Taking place in Karnaka, the art style here in Death of the Outsider is pretty much the same as its predecessor, which isn't bad. In fact, I really loved Karnaka if you had watched that video. Taking place years after that game, however, we do see a much more cleaned up and polished cityscape. No blood flies, high-class citizens have returned to the streets, and the inclusion of more civilian NPCs, the world feels more alive than in Dishonored 2, which makes the levels more interesting and dynamic. People don't just aggro to you right away, instead run to call guards if you do some shady shit, allowing you to make yourself scarce in the process. While the Fight Club level is pretty linear, as this is basically the tutorial level, yes, we got away from the segmented tutorials of Dishonored 2, you are soon set loose upon the Upper Syria district, I think I'm pronouncing that right, an area lavish with cash, bars dedicated to gangs of eyeless, and numerous civilian abodes you could rummage through. This area is cramped, from the main streets to the side streets, and yet sprawling in the amount of area that you can actually explore. And while there are no gimmicks like the Clockwork Mansion or A Crack in the Slab, this area is far and away better to explore than any similar spaces we had in the prior title. The amount of paths you can navigate, explore, infiltrate through, and hide in are numerous, and coupled with the contracts as well as the inclusion of the civilians present in the area, this space does so much more in making it feel lived in. It really honestly didn't hit me until you have to actually go and meet a journalist in a random apartment building that there is actually so much more going on in this one level than had been captured in any of the games prior. The bank heist mission brings us back to Upper Syria, this time at night, in order to infiltrate the bank to steal said dagger we mentioned before. I love this level, and with the multitude of ways to infiltrate and get into the vault itself, makes this level an absolute blast to play through. I must admit though, I am a sucker for heists, which is one of the reasons why I love GTA 5 and games like Payday, despite not having playing a ton of the latter. I love the idea of it though, and excited for Payday 3. The only recycled area is the Royal Conservatory. Now after the events in the prior game is now overrun with overseers, makes this feel the same, albeit with no witches inside of it. Now the final level, the mines, is way longer than any other level in this game, going in and out of the void while exploring the mine shafts, and while pretty linear in nature, has a lot of awesome iconography, shifts in enemies, and exploitable, which while probably the weakest of the mission areas was still a great time. The cultists have summoned creatures of the void, leading to the final encounter with the outsider, adds a ton of tension to this area, and allowing the player through specific use of powers and wall writing makes this level almost skippable at the end. Really adds to the I broke this game in a cool fucking way feeling. That is honestly super impactful. In all of the Arkane games I have played, I can safely say that I haven't seen them truly miss on any sort of level, and what makes these levels so much better is the story wrapping around them. So let's get into the narrative of the Death of the Outsider, one of which I actually found pretty entertaining.
I can taste blood in my mouth.
Now I want to set the record straight on something. I actually did love Dishonored 2 while playing it, but what really dragged the game down for me was the narrative of that game. And while I always believe gameplay is king, I do think narrative plays an important role in ensuring the player has a reason to keep pushing forward, to bring them into the next gameplay segment, at least for single player games. Dishonored 2 was severely lacking in that department for me, so color me surprised when I find out that Death of the Outsider has a actually halfway decent story, at least at the setup. After freeing Doubt, he explains to us his plan on killing the Outsider, the mysterious figure he feels responsible for the chaos of the world, and in a way, he is right. Seeing him in the last two games, it revolves around giving your protagonist, as well as others, powers of the void, in order to either overthrow, murder, or manipulate those around them, including Dowd, whom the Outsider had set on his path when originally bestowing his powers upon him. It's clear there's a grudge between Dowd and the Outsider, and he believes he's found a way to kill him for good. However, given his weakened state, he asks Billy for help in his goal, and while disbelieving at first, she assists her former mentor, more in doing so. Scouring the Upper Syria district and breaking into the bank, Billy finds the dagger in the hands of the eyeless, that which was used thousands of years prior in the creation of the Outsider at the behest of Dowd. Upon returning with the knife in hand, Billy finds that Dowd is passed, and in memoriam burns the dreadful whale as well as Dowd's body in the final act of respect, while affirming to herself in her commitment to finish what Dowd had started. From here, Billy heads to the Royal Conservatory in order to find out more about where the Outsider was actually created. Learning of the Shindari mines, once again I think I'm saying that right, and the Eyeless' fascination with the area, Billy heads there only to find that the Eyeless have set up an entire research operation there, studying the Void, the Outsider, and all sorts of otherworldly beings in the process. This place is strangely connected with the Void, and in using an eye of the dead god, Billy heads into the Void itself, where she finds that the Eyeless have also set up shop here as well, with the help of other creatures inhabiting the area. Making her way through, we find the Outsider, stuck in a rock, secluded on a giant outcropping surrounded by spirits long past, one being Dowd himself. It is here that we see the Outsider is trapped, prisoner to his fate because of a ritual done long ago, binding him to the Void for eternity. It is honestly a sad sight, not further confirmed by what the Outsider tells you upon entering the level, that she needs to find him before actually making the choice. He didn't choose to be here, he was imprisoned by force, which, as Billy intimates, would make anyone act out and cause as much chaos as humanly possible. We have our two choices here. We can stab the Outsider, fulfilling Dowd's wish, or we can save him by convincing Dowd to utter the one thing stripped from the Outsider long ago, his name. It turns out that the brand of the Outsider is actually his own name, and either way, no longer being attached to the Void any longer, we finally put this being to rest. I personally find that freeing the Outsider option is far more impactful, with Billy pleading with Dowd to free him based on the circumstances of this boy just being a prisoner here as he was. In taking this option, the Outsider can now live as a mortal, living out the rest of his days in the mortal realm, eternally grateful for the freedom he had been given by Billy. It's a touching ending, and call me a softie, but there's something about freeing a man from his fate he didn't ask for a bit heartwarming. While pretty stock standard by most video game narratives, there's a lot of world building here in this story, seeing the redemption of Billy, her coming to reconcile with her time with Dowd, who is essentially a father figure to her, and the Outsider, a boy thrust into a terrible situation by those around him to essentially create a monster, ensuing chaos as that's all he'd ever known. With the Outsider gone, it's unclear what will happen to the Void and how it will manifest itself in the future, but in spite of everything, Billy's free to live the rest of her life, knowing the impact she herself caused to the world of Dishonored. It is unclear what we'll get next, but with the Outsider gone, I personally would love to see Arkane take another shot at making Dishonored a thing. Unfortunately, I have a feeling that we're going to be getting Deathloop 2 here next. A tragedy, honestly, if you ask me, but one can hope. I adore Dishonored, the worlds it built, the characters it's fostered, and while there have been some missteps along the way, this is a series I've loved coming back to for this video series. Hopefully, you enjoyed it along with me. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts were on Death of the Outsider and on Dishonored as a whole. I love reading them and interacting with you guys down there, and I want to say another huge thank you for helping me hit this milestone of 1,000 subscribers here on the channel. I could easily be talking to a void, pun intended, but seeing the growth of the channel has actually been amazing and truly humbling in the process. Seriously, I can't thank you guys enough. As always, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you want more content like this, hit that subscribe button. I would very much appreciate it. And that brings this video and the Dishonored series to a close. And so with that, I thank you all for your time. For all my new viewers, welcome. To all my returning viewers, welcome back. And my name is Brendan, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.
Died for the people twisted by his magic, the cults, witches, and killers. For all the madness and chaos they caused. For Dowd, for me. And after all this, I'm still just a murderer.